Welcome to Native Exiles, Alderwood Community Church's podcast, where we talk about following Jesus in the tension of being in the world, but not of it. And we're coming out of a little mini-series on technology and how to navigate the digital world as followers of Jesus. And really excited for what's ahead in the next few episodes. We're going to be diving into parenting and how we can be better parents as we think about helping our kids grow up in this world. And so today we're going to have a little bit of a bridge episode. We're going to talk about what does it look like to parent our kids in this digital world? How can we help our kids navigate the challenges of technology? It's going to be a great conversation. Can't wait to get into it. Here we go. Steve, you're a parent, aren't you?
I am indeed.
I actually had both your girls in student ministries, which is fun. So I know that parenting is one of the things you care more than anything about. Curious, if I offered you something as a parent and I said, if you just do this one simple thing, you can cut the risk of your kids dealing with significant mental health issues in half. It's not complicated. It's not hard. Like, just you do this one thing, it's going to cut it in half. Is that something you'd be interested in?
No brainer. You're going to publish a huge book here, I can see.
Well, here's what it is. Recent study coming from Boston Children's Hospital. They have a whole area of their team that's dedicated to digital health for kids. They did a study that showed that if your kids spend 3 hours or more on social media a day, their risk of multiple mental health outcomes, but significantly anxiety and depression, doubles. So if you want to eliminate that, if you want to cut the risk in half, all you have to do is keep them off social media and things are going to be great. How does that sound?
It sounds so easy, Wyatt. I mean, this is simple. No, it's interesting, right? Like, I think of all the talk we heard coming out of COVID about how we blamed COVID for a lot of the anxiety and things that we've seen among teens. But yeah, I think it goes back further than that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I got to imagine any parents listening to this today aren't shocked to hear that there's some negative outcomes for social media use in particular. Another huge court case going on right now. About 40 state attorneys general in our country are suing Meta, which is the parent company of Facebook and Instagram. And basically the lawsuit is alleging that Meta intentionally incorporates things into their algorithms, into how their apps work, that are designed to hook people, and actually teenagers in particular, to hook teenagers, to get them to spend more time, to not be able to set it down, things that they know are harmful and yet they don't take out for profits. One thing that I thought was interesting in particular, it's not just that the feeds are giving you stuff that you're interested in reading and so you don't want to put it down. They're talking about how Instagram designs filters that they know harm kids' self-image. So if people aren't familiar with filters on Instagram, these are things that change the way that you look in a selfie or something like that. And one of the filters that's just native to Instagram is it changes your facial features. You can make your nose smaller, your lips bigger. It actually can change your body features. You can make you look skinnier, your boobs bigger, anything you want, and it makes that photo look that way. And Meta has internal conversations amongst their executives where they say very clearly, we know this is causing teenagers to have a lower view of their own body, right? They're changing the things they don't like. And basically that conversation was just shut down, actually all the way from the top by Mark Zuckerberg.
We have transcripts or emails to prove this.
Also subpoenaed in the court case. And,
wow.
And Zuckerberg basically just said, hey, look, there's market demand for this, so let's just not worry about it. I mean, basically, people want to use this. We're making money. Let's keep going. And so this is not some kind of Christian crusade that social media, that technology is harmful for our kids. It's recognized all over the place. And it's not just social media either. It's video games as well.
Yeah.
I was reading another study and put out by the Addictive Behaviors Journal, or published in the Addictive Behaviors Journal, looking at video game use among teenagers, students in particular. They surveyed 3,000 students and showed that for females, 7.8% of females had a gaming disorder, and 19% of male students. And a gaming disorder is just defined by three things. It's an inability to control the urge to play video games. It's the feeling that gaming is more important than any other activity. And it's continuing to play video games despite the negative consequences of the behavior on relationships, academic performance, and or work. So 1 out of every 5 teenage boys, it fits that category. 1 out of 12 girls, something like that. So there's this broad recognition today that the digital world that we live in, social media in particular, but video games as well, entertainment, streaming content, all of that, is having some significant negative consequences for our kids. And yet, I think it's also true that as parents, we're all struggling to combat it. It's not as simple as maybe we would want it to be.
Yeah, before we talk about a couple of the ways we're feeling that individually as parents, I mean, I just want to riff off a couple of things you just said. One is, and I think we'll do this a lot, but I think of the anecdotal evidence for what you're saying. Like a good friend of mine, I watched his kid grow up. He was such a bright kid, very precocious. From an early age, you could just tell this kid's going somewhere. And in his teens, became incredibly addicted, probably clinically addicted to video games. And he's now a kid who's just living at home, and they're trying really hard to get him off the proverbial couch. And it's super sad because I saw this kid grow up. You know, I think a lot of us can fill in the blanks with stories like that. The other thing you said that really jumps out at me is this is not just a Christian like moment where when I was growing up, you know, Christians were talking about crazy things like if you play Queen, another one bites the dust backward, it says, you know, it's fun to smoke marijuana. Like the Christians were out of their minds.
It must have been fun to grow up in your
It
generation.
was fantastic. You do know about backmasking. That's another episode. I mean, you know, we had these crazy things that we got wrapped up in. This, like you said, is not just some crazy Christian or niche concern. I mean, sociologists, just look at the headlines. You know, suicide rates among teens are skyrocketing. This is a very real problem.
I mean, you were talking about so just anecdotally what is easy to observe. I was a youth pastor for a number of years, and it is just obvious that there is a difference between the generation of kids that's growing up right now who have never known anything but being immersed in the digital world, and even just 10 years previous, my generation growing up, where, you know, I wasn't introduced to the iPhone. Facebook didn't come out until I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And rates of anxiety, rates of depression, other kinds of mental health struggles are just so much more prevalent now than they were amongst my generation growing up. And it's, you know, all the studies are showing it's not a coincidence. It's not just something that randomly happened, that the technology that our kids have is a big impact on it. And so, you know, churches care about this, pastors care about this, and we're talking about it. But also, I mean, just all the organizations in our country that are trying to help kids thrive are pointing this out as well. You know, one just quick thing to point to, the American Academy of Pediatrics puts out recommendations for how much screen time is appropriate for kids. So here's what they say. If your kid's under 2 years old, 0 to 2, the appropriate amount of screen time is nothing. 0 minutes. Do not let your infants look at screens. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. Bonding between kids and parents suffers when young kids are on screens. But then if you get a little bit older than that, for 2 to 12, they recommend no more than 1 hour per day. And that should be something that you're doing together with your kids, not just, you know, putting them down in front of an iPad and letting them sit by themselves doing whatever they want.
Right.
And then 13 to 17, they recommend 2 hours a day or less. Now, they will say that doesn't include homework. So this is really about entertainment on screens. This is about streaming, social media, video games, all that kind of stuff, but no more than 2 hours a day.
Well, and it's just shocking, right? Because it's so contrary to reality. I mean, we look around us, that is just not even close to what's happening.
I don't know any parents that are following these guidelines.
No.
Like, I'm actually curious how the American Academy of Pediatrics found anyone to study to show that these were healthy levels, because my experience is that everybody is just blowing these guidelines out of the water. So why is that the case, Steve? Like, last time I checked, most parents are actually pretty serious about wanting the best for their kids. We love our kids. We want to raise them up to be healthy and adjusted people. The evidence is pretty glaring that a ton of screen time is harmful, and yet we're all still doing it. Why is that? Why can't we get this under control?
I can't count the number of conversations I've had with other parents that echo, I think, what Holly and I felt, which is you feel like you're kind of stuck. Like, it's everywhere. It's in the schools, right? Every kid in our school districts is issued a Chromebook. So, you know, that's going to help them with their homework, but it's also going to launch them into other parts of the internet and social media. I mean, almost every kid that we know these days not only gets a phone, usually by about age 10 or 11, but a smartphone that is this portal. So you feel like you can't avoid it, and you know that it's bringing harm to kids. You see these stats. but you feel stuck. I think that's where a lot of us find ourselves.
Yeah, I just want to sympathize with parents for a second. The last thing we want to do today is just make people feel guilty about, what's going on. It is hard. There are so many challenges to navigate in this area with our kids. I'm raising a 3-year-old who's about to turn 4 and a 5-year-old right now, and they both have Kindle Fire tablets for kids. Amazon's kind of cornered the market on tablet devices for kids. They do a really good job with it, and part of the challenge is it is hard to raise young kids, I've found. I think other people have experienced that too. They constantly need you. They always, they don't sit quietly and hang out. Every once in a while, I like to enjoy a moment with my wife by ourselves without being interrupted.
In a restaurant, for instance.
Yeah, Yeah. And the only thing we've found that can make that happen is these Kindle Fire tablets. Like if we want to have a conversation at a restaurant, if we want to just kind of be together, we can throw their headphones on, give them a tablet. They're playing games.
It's a digital pacifier.
Oh, it's so easy.
Yep.
And they love it. Everyone's happy. Like, we just try not to think about how we're being judged by everybody around us in the restaurant, and we enjoy ourselves. Like, it is so tempting to go to that route over and over and over again. And now I'm okay with the fact that we do that from time to time. I think prioritizing your marriage is a really important thing, but because it's so easy, it's also so easy to abuse. It is so easy every time you're annoyed with your kids, every time you feel like you're exhausted and don't have the energy to be present or to parent them, to just say, why don't you just go on your iPad? And I mean, it's right there all the time.
And when we felt, as our kids have gotten older, like we'll push back on their, even needing a phone. We were probably a little bit late adopters, later than a lot of our friends and things. And our kids, they know how to lay it on so thick, and one of the things they would say, like the argument, Holly and I would feel like we're making progress, giving them all these reasons why they shouldn't have social media or be on their phones as much as they are. And they would say, but Dad, like in class, my teacher requires us to use our phone. We have those, what are they called again? The surveys that you can take online? Kahoot. Yeah. I mean, teacher will just say in the middle of class, everybody get your phone out. That is supposed to stay in your pocket all day in the public schools, but doesn't. And we're going to do a Kahoot, like it just, you're feeling like you're actually like making your kids stand out as this socially awkward sore thumb. And when they start leveraging that stuff, it's really hard.
Right, so there's guilt on both sides. There's the guilt of feeling like you're letting your kids do too much and it's going to, ruin them. And then there's the guilt of your kids laying it on that you're like making them an Amish person in the midst of, the modern world, and everybody's making fun of them all day long because they're not on their phone and they don't have the technology. So, I mean, there's no way to avoid the guilt. I think, associated with that, there's also a fear many parents feel of, are we over sheltering our kids? Like if we don't let them on these technologies, are they not going to, be able to be socially well adjusted? Are they not going to know what the other kids are talking about at school? Are they not going to develop the skills they need to be able to handle this as adults? Like, are we sheltering them too much? I remember actually when I was a middle school pastor and your daughters were in my group, me talking to you as a parent and me basically telling you that, like, I was this 22-year-old punk who didn't know anything and hadn't ever even...
I tried to tell you that.
Yeah, and I'm like, dude, Steve, just chill out, man. Like, get with the program. The world is digital now. Everyone's on social media. Your kids are going to be weird if you don't just let them get on social media. What's the big deal? And I have totally changed my tune since then. I mean, I rarely admit that I'm dead wrong on something, but I was dead wrong at that point. But I was playing into something that I'm sure was on your mind, the fear of sheltering your kids, and I was making it even harder for you. So
I think there's one other, and by the way, it's really nice to hear you say you were wrong, and it's being recorded, which is fantastic. I'm going to call Kate after the show and make sure she.
Good.
But I think there's another issue. I think we'll touch on this maybe a little bit more as we move along. Like, we as parents know that we have our own struggles with. Okay, we don't want to say it might be addiction, but we're spending a whole lot of time on social media, a whole lot of time on digital devices with screen time. And we might feel, even rightfully so, that we're being a little bit hypocritical. So there's that piece too. We don't know how to manage it in our own life, so we feel awkward bringing it up with our kids. There's a whole lot of things that conspire to make this a really tough issue.
Yeah. So no judgment here. This is one of the hardest things I think that parents are navigating today. And yet, just because it's hard doesn't mean that there's not room for us to grow and opportunities for us to step into this challenging space and make some decisions and set some habits that are really going to help our kids thrive and navigate the digital world that's so tough right now. And so let's take a break, and when we come back, let's talk about what that looks like. How can we be godly parents to our kids and help them have the tools they need to navigate the digital world as they grow up?
Well, Wyatt, despite our rough start, me, you, your 22-year-old self, you and I have had a lot of really good conversations about this over the years, and we've wrestled with it. We continue to wrestle with it. Our kids are at different stages. You have littles. I have a 16 and a 20-year-old. But this is not just some good principles we've read or learned. Like, this is coming out of our own lives and experience. I really want to jump back to that thing I brought up a moment ago, because I felt this personally. Like, the hypocrisy thing, I know as a parent, I'm called to lead by example. I know in my heart of hearts that my kids are really watching what I do as much or probably more than what I say. And that is a really tough challenge. Like, how do you approach that as a parent?
Yeah, I mean, I think even going back just to the series we've been in, part of, for me, what is so important about figuring out how to navigate technology in my own life is recognizing that it isn't just about my relationship with Jesus and my health, that the decisions I make and the way that I handle technology is going to have huge impacts on my kids. And I think maybe the first spot that I would invite parents to think about this conversation biblically is just to recognize that for parents, you have a very unique role in discipling your kids, that God has given you a calling to be the most influential voice, the most influential person in your kid's life, that what you do and the decisions you make are going to have more impact on your kids than anyone else, and their teachers and their pastors and their friends. And so I think that's just the starting point for me, is this really matters, that what you do is really going to impact your kids. And I see you've got Deuteronomy 6 up in front of you.
Such a great passage.
Yeah, talk to us a little about that.
Well, I mean, this is one of those passages where, this is the children of Israel just delivered out of Egypt, and Moses is recapping the law for them, and he's telling them that, hey, I want you to pass on these laws, these decrees that I've given to you after you cross the Jordan, so that your children and their children after them may fear the Lord. And just one thing I want to make sure we read is such a beautiful promise that accompanies that command, where he says, I'm giving you these commands and giving them these commands so that you may enjoy long life. Yeah. Like, we don't want to just talk about the negatives here. We want to talk about what's on the other side of managing the digital world well.
So, I mean, he's telling parents, like, this is your job. It is your job to teach your kids all the commandments, to teach them to walk in a way that honors God. And then I love that there's all these strategies that he gives too.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just this general principle. It's like, here's how you do it. Take the commands and, bind them to your foreheads, put them on your doorposts, talk about it when you get up and when you go to bed and when you're on the path. Like, there's all these ways that are given of how to impart this. And one of the things I love about Deuteronomy 6 too is when you get to the end, in verse 20, there's this future-minded statement. In verse 20, it says, when your son asks you in the future, what is the meaning of these decrees, statutes, and ordinances that the Lord your God has commanded you, then you tell him, basically, hey, this is who God is, this is what he did. He rescued us from Egypt. He saved us. He made us his people. Like, you're going to give him the meaning to why all the things you've raised up and matter. And what I love about that is there's a recognition that often when you are imparting the faith to your kids, when you're setting boundaries, when you're giving them the rules even, they're not going to get it. They're not going to understand it. That's why he says in the future when your son asks,
later on,
like when he grows up a little bit and he turns back and he says, hey, what was the point of all of this? That's when you're able to explain it. And so if we have this conversation about technology, that would be one of my encouragement to parents is part of your job is going to be to set some ground rules, to set some boundaries, some expectations that your kids may not even get. They may not understand, that you may seem like some sort of tyrannical parent who's doing, stupid things and is totally out of touch. But have the hope that in the future, when they grow up, they're going to ask you and you're going to be able to talk about why. You're going to be able to show them some of the purpose in it. And so let's get into a little bit of the details. What does it look like?
Can I just jump on that real quick too? It reminds me a little bit of something we talked about last episode where, we encourage people with spiritual disciplines, that there are disciplines of abstinence and disciplines of engagement. Another way of saying that is like, even here with the command, there's a promise. There's the sort of don't do this, but then there's also here's why. And I love that there is both sides to that. And as I was saying just a minute ago, we have to show our kids there's two sides. It's not just don't do this, it's here's why. But there's also, even if they don't get it, our ability to say, hey, I've seen the grace of God in my life. I'm experiencing this joy in my life, these fruits of the Spirit in my life. It has to not only have a positive side to the negative, but it has to be something we're living out of personal experience. So I can't overstate what I think is one of the key issues here, and that is our example.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where we should start. I mean, that's really the first principle. The first thing I think parents ought to have in mind when you think about how to disciple your kids, how to raise them up when it comes to technology, is to lead by example. And that starts so much earlier than the teenage years. I think it's easy to think about the teenage years where it's like, you can't be on your phone all day and telling your 15-year-old that they're not allowed to be on their phone all day. Like, that just doesn't work.
Right.
But I think actually it starts so much younger. I mean, kids from a very young age are just wired to point out hypocrisy. When you're starting to learn the rules of the world from your parents, anytime you see anyone violating that, it's an offense, you know? At our house,
colossal outrage.
yeah. At our house, we just got a new couch in our living room, and in the old couch, it was a Craigslist couch. It was not very nice, and so we let the kids eat snacks on it and all that kind of stuff. And this new couch, we're like, no, new couch, new rules. No one eats on the couch. That's the new rules for my kids. You're not allowed to have snacks, anything on the couch, only at the table. And like 3 days after we got this couch, we had guests over, and we were having dinner, and after dinner we moved from the table, and we had, cookies for dessert, and we had the cookies, and we put them out in the living room, and we were sitting on the couch. Our guests actually were sitting on the couch with their little plate of cookies, and my 3-year-old son Thatcher runs up to these guests he literally has just met and points his finger and says, there is no eating on the couch. Like, the capacity to understand that he's supposed to follow a rule that other people don't have to follow just isn't there. And I mean, that's a silly example, but I think one of the things you have to realize is that your kids aren't just listening to you to understand what the rules are about technology. They're watching you to understand what the rules are about technology, and they're always watching. And so it really does start with your own example in this area. And at the stage I'm at in parenting with young kids, so much of it is not that I'm going to be doing things I won't let them do. I do all kinds of things that we don't let them do.
Right. You drive a car, they don't.
Right. But for me, it's, am I present with them? Like, if I'm telling them they're not allowed to be on their iPad, they got to go play. When they come and they want to talk to me, am I on my iPad? Am I on my phone and too busy to actually engage in, in-person, one-on-one at their level where they have my full attention and I'm not distracted? Because if you talk about not just being against things, but being for things, it's not just that we don't want them to use technology. Yep. We want them to be people who delight in having real relationship, who are conversationalists, who love being present in the moment. And if you want kids who are that way, then you need to be asking the question first, are you living that way?
That is exactly what I was thinking. That is the positive side demonstrated. I have bandwidth in my life to drop, especially the digital distractions for you, always.
With your kids who are in high school, out of high school, you're just coming through those teenage years, where's the lead by example thing really showed up for you?
I mean, I was laughing earlier because it hits a little close to home when you say, the parent yelling at their kid, get off your phone, get off your device, as I'm clutching the phone myself. So there's that one. A lot of it, I think, for me is not just in telling them, watch how much, digital intake you have, screen time you have, but teaching them by example how to use that well. So, I mean, I've mentioned on the show before, that I use my iPad for my devotions. It's a tremendous help to me. It's a great, incredible tool for my study, for my time with Jesus, for my quiet times in the morning. I journal there, all that. But, that takes a lot of discipline. That stupid Temu ad on the left side of my Bible app, I have learned, and I'm still learning how to get rid of those digital distractions. But for them to see positively modeled, like how this can be a tool for good, that's one that I've really tried to help them with.
That's good. Okay, well, if lead by example is maybe the first thing to think about, here's the second one that I just want to get on parents' radars. One of the huge responsibilities of being a parent is that it is your job to protect your kids, to protect them from things that would harm them. And we need to take technology and put it into that category. So first off, this is not controversial or even like hard to grasp at all. This is just obvious. Parenting means protecting your kids. And when they're super young, it means, you don't give them solid food until they're able to chew it so they don't choke. It means you don't leave them unattended in the bathtub so they don't drown. It means they hold your hand in parking lots and all of that. When you're older, when your kids are older, we know it means that, you protect your daughters by not letting them be out at 2 a.m. with strange boys that no one knows. There's all, you don't let your kids drive before they're trained and ready and have a license. So like there's all these things where we just totally understand, yes, I need to protect my kids. It is not always been clear that technology is in that realm, but I think now it really is. When I was that stupid 22-year-old youth pastor telling you to get with the program, the truth is I never thought of social media as something that kids need to be protected from. It was a new technology. It had just gone on the scene. No one was thinking about how this might be harmful in any way. This was just a cool new thing. And maybe the only harm we talked about was the potential harm that like some stranger with bad motives could start talking to your kids through social media. But there was easy ways to protect against that. You could keep your account private. You could do things like that. But the harm of how this would rewire our brains and mess with our emotion and our mental health and all that was on no one's radar. It was like smoking in the 30s. Right? It was like 4 out of 5 doctors recommend Camel. I mean, that was the social media world. We could only see the positive thing.
Everybody was smoking. Every star in a movie in the 30s. Are we going to start getting Surgeon General warnings like with our social media?
I think we are.
I hope so.
I really think, like, honestly, the metaphor of smoking to social media today, I think is
pretty
actually
apt.
Pretty there. So that was where we were. Today, there's no excuse for that. Like, the research is out. We've seen the effects. It is clear that technology is something that our kids need to be protected from. And so as a parent, just think in those terms. Think that like the same way that I'm not going to let my kid have, unadulterated access to drugs and alcohol, that I'm not going to let them, be downtown Seattle at 2 a.m. by themselves. Like, there's protection that you have to be providing. And so I'm not saying that means you never let your kid on a phone or you never let them have social media or anything like that. But it is for sure saying that unlimited access should also not be on the table, that you have to help your kids navigate this. You can't expect them to protect themselves from this.
And we're not going to go super deep on some of this. I really encourage people to do some reading on their own. But, as a dad of 2 daughters, as they've gotten older, one of the things I'm particularly aware of in terms of harm to them is that the research shows that social media in particular has more devastating effects on girls, especially girls in the 7th and 8th grade range. It definitely goes beyond that, but that's one of the reasons a lot of authorities, sociologists, parenting experts are recommending wait till at least 15, if not 16. To introduce your kids to social media. But with my girls, one of the things we just try to keep on the table, they're both in the world of social media now, is that, there are these harmful comparisons. There is this bullying. There is this often unspoken but very real pressure to dress this way, to, be this way. And so just talking about those things with our daughters and recognizing what the harm actually is, in my case specifically with girls, is one of the ways we try to do that.
Yeah. And when it comes to protecting our kids, I think part of it is just a recognition that kids are very rarely going to thank you for protecting them from things that could be harmful. I mean, it's all the way down to just the most simple things we talked about with raising young kids. Like, I don't expect my kids to thank me for making them hold my hand in a parking lot. They feel like they are completely big enough to walk around the parking lot themselves and not need us. And they tell me often, but that's not my gauge for what the appropriate thing to do as a parent is. It isn't what my kids appreciate or what they agree with. It's my role to decide and to implement what I know needs to happen for them. And so for parents, the biggest thing is just getting the game on this one. If you have no boundaries for your kids, if there's no screen time password on their iPhone, if they have access to social media and Netflix and video games in their bedroom with the door closed without you watching all day long, like, these should be red flags that you are exposing your kids to harm without jumping in, without having any input to it. And exactly what that input looks like it could be different on the kid, on the parent. We're not going
by the age.
We're not trying to be legalistic about
Right.
this at all. But this is something where if you want your kids to thrive, you got to get in the game on this.
Yeah,
one.
let me mention a few other specifics that we've done. I think we've talked about putting your phone to bed. That's kind of along the lines of parenting your phone we've talked about. But in our home, everybody puts their phone to bed by a certain time. It's just off limits. Take some time to read. Take some time. Let's visit. So that's one I strongly encourage people to consider, is having a bedtime for your phone. Another one I would really encourage, and it's going to be a bit controversial, but I think it's going to be more and more something we're talking about, which is getting phones out of schools. And you can't control that because currently every school district I know of allows kids to have phones, although they say it's supposed to be in their pocket during classes. I've heard from my daughters
I'm sure that works great.
Yeah, it's a fantastic rule that everyone follows. But, we have really pushed our girls. We have encouraged them not to take their phone to school. I know that seems insane to parents in the era in which we live. They still do. They won that one, Wyatt. They did win that one. But we really pushed them to use it as little as possible.
I think that really leads us to the last principle that we want to point out for parents, which is be willing to be countercultural. Be willing to acknowledge that doing the right thing for your kids might mean that you're making a decision that 90% of the other kids' parents aren't making. So when your kids tell you, but every kid has their phone with them, but every kid is on social media, but every other kid is allowed to be in their bedroom, with their phone. Every kid doesn't have to put their phone to bed, Now, notice that's not true. It's not every kid, but it might be true that it is the vast majority. But part of what we talked about at the top was just recognizing that the norm is not working. Like what is normal right now in society, what every kid is doing, what every parent is doing, it is leading to all these really bad outcomes. And so what that means is if you want to protect your kids from that, if you want your kids to be healthier than the norm, then you have to be willing to do things that other families aren't doing and be ready for the pushback. Be ready for your kids to fight back against that.
And to be fair, we're not saying that there haven't been huge challenges and huge battles that parents have fought, particularly with teenagers, well, maybe with toddlers as well over the years. But we're talking about some really desperate things. Like one of the things that I have noticed, I drive right by my kids' bus stop in the mornings. And Wyatt, it's incredible to me. Like they don't talk to each other. They literally are all facing different directions, staring at their device, looking at the ground. And one of the ways I urged both of my girls to be countercultural was to just talk to someone. And they're like, Dad, I can't. It's like this social contract, this taboo that is just, you can't cross that line. But we're not talking about, challenges in the past, like telling your kids not to smoke, for instance. We're talking about just like be countercultural by talking to people. Social media is teaching our kids to not even have the most basic of social skills.
I think one of the other things I add here is if you're going to be countercultural, if you're going to do things that other families aren't doing, do it with empathy. Do it with understanding that is going to put your kid in some hard spots.
Yeah, that's fair.
That it might be true that when they're on the bus on the way home from school, every other kid is on their phone the whole time and no one's talking. And it means they're sitting there by themselves, not having a conversation, just staring out the window, and they're lonely and they're bored and they don't like it. Like, be willing to step into some of the hard things that are going to come from this. And it does mean being willing to listen to them and maybe being willing to rethink some things now and again. But I think it also means recognizing that some of the hard things are worth it. That it doesn't mean every decision's easy. It doesn't mean that every decision has immediate positive outcomes that you can feel right away. But in the long term, if you can help your kids be healthy, if you can help them have positive self-image, you can help them be socially aware and able to engage in in-person relationships, like those are outcomes that are well worthwhile, even if it's hard now.
Can I jump in on that one too, Wyatt? I think one of the other things that we should bring up in terms of being full of grace and extending mercy and rethinking this is, what if we've screwed up?
Yeah.
What if we've been letting our kids just have unbridled access to their phones? What if we ourselves are harmfully addicted to our devices? Like, where do we go then if we really messed up? What do we do?
You can always try again with your next kid. So no, I'm
have
kidding.
more kids.
Yeah. No, I think one, we need to have the conversation just soaked in the grace of God.
Yeah.
That God's grace is powerful enough to meet us no matter where we are, even in huge mistakes, even in patterns that have gone on for a long time. And so if you know Jesus, there's always hope. The other thing I'd say, just from a brain science perspective, is that our brains are plastic. We are remarkably adaptable, that even if you have horrible habits and you are addicted to your phone, it can be changed. Your brain can be readapted. That if you start making new decisions and put new habits in place, that you will experience new things.
And that is not just the science of neuroplasticity. That is the grace of God in
Amen.
what he made us to be.
Amen. And then the other thing I'd say is, man, we are all struggling to navigate this.
For sure.
We're all making mistakes. Some days are better than others. Some weeks are better than others. Some years are better than others. Don't let how difficult it seems to nail this keep you from just making some good decisions that are in front of you right now. You don't have to boil the ocean in a day. You don't have to solve every single problem. If you can just take the next step that's in front of you, Jesus meets you there. He meets you right where you are in the decisions he's giving you today. And so just start taking the next step. And I think, for me, have the faith that it'll be worth it. You talk about how these decisions can be really hard, can be painful even today, but to believe that they're worth it. I love Proverbs chapter 29, verse 17. It says, discipline your children and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire. Now, from one perspective, I have not found that to be true. I find that discipline your children and they tell you that you're a mean parent and, cry and yell at you. Like that often is in my experience.
You don't love me. That is the nuclear bomb.
But I think what this proverb is saying is that it has a longer timeline in mind. That if you discipline your children, if you do the hard thing and have the hard conversations and the arguments and the disappointment, the pain and all that of what it means to discipline your children today, that in the future, they will give you peace and they will bring you the delights you desire, that you will see God shape them through the hard things now to turn them into the people that he made them to be, that you desire them to be mature, to be full of grace and love for others and socially well-adjusted and all those things, that it's worth it to put in the hard work now.
By God's grace, I have a little bit more of the long game than you. God's given us the ability to see that to some degree. My older daughter, she pushed really, really hard. The older one always gets the benefits first too. Well, no, not always. But in her case, she got Instagram at 15, which our now 16-year-old held over us for a long time. She had to wait an extra year. But, my older daughter, Maddie, in the last year or two has just started reflecting back to us. I do appreciate that you guys had some more strict boundaries and guidelines in place. I felt stupid at times. I felt that it was unjust at times, but she's seeing the benefit of that. And, I'm going to brag shamelessly, but she's just such a wonderfully social person who loves other people well. And I think she honestly would prefer to be with people than sit with her social media. And so, we've seen some of that. And discipline, the thing about discipline is it brings into account what we've talked about, both the negative and the positive. But it's not just negative. Like punishment is about you did this, you're going to face this consequence. Discipline is about there's a consequence, but it's redemptive. I want to help you see what's good, what's waiting for you on the other side of that. And we've been able to see that. And I think we want to encourage parents with the fact that, you're in it for the long game. It takes time, but don't give up.
That's great. I think we'll leave people with that. This is just one aspect of parenting. We're going to get into a number of other conversations on how we can grow as parents as we follow Jesus together. But for today, Steve, thanks for talking. It's been good.
Great stuff. It's been a lot to chew on and think about, these different topics we've covered under this heading of technology. Our next episode we're really excited about. We're bridging into a new series on parenting, and we thought a great way to go that direction would be to talk about parenting your kids through technology. So I'm a parent. Wyatt's a parent. I think a lot of you out there are in that role. Really look forward to challenging, encouraging you, giving you some helpful thoughts on how to navigate that together on our next episode of Native Exiles.